Jonathan Lee Riches investigates. Let's talk about John Gotti, the Gambino crime boss. You've heard about John Gotti, the infamous John Gotti. Well, I'm out in front of Sparks Steakhouse. How did John Gotti become John Gotti? Sparks Steakhouse. Paul Castellano, the Gambino crime boss, was shot to death right out here as he came here December 16th, 1985, around 5:30 p.m. to go to dinner. He arrived here in a limo. This is Manhattan. Arrived here in a limo, and then when he stepped out of his limo, he was shot by assassins. And John Gotti was waiting in a nearby car to make sure Paul Castellano was dead. It happened here. And then once Paul Castellano died, eventually John Gotti became the Gambino crime boss, known as Teflon Don. Eventually he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Let me spin the camera around to show you outside Sparks Steakhouse. So it's a one-way street, so Castellano drives Sparks Steakhouse, and he got out of his limo to get some steaks, I'm assuming. He was assassinated. Happened here. New York Post in 2000 called this place the greatest steaks. Look at their menu. Look at their menu. Yeah. At the time, these crime families were all beefing with one another and internally having civil wars with one another. I'm not a mob expert, but the Gambinos were having a lot of issues. John Gotti takes out Castellano so then he could become crime boss. But let me give you a little bit of history about the report about what happened here, 1985. This article right here comes from the History Channel. When a mob boss out for a steak dinner was murdered in cold blood. Gambino family crime boss Frank Cali's murder is the first Mafia Don assassination in New York since John Gotti had Paul Castellano killed in 1985. Just before 5:30 on December evening in 1985, mob boss Paul Castellano stepped out of a limo in front of Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan and was shot to death. The four assassins who gunned him down were dressed in trench coats and Russian fur hats. John Gotti, the man who arranged the hit, sat in a car nearby to make sure Big Paul was dead. It was daring in the sense that it was done in Manhattan in the Christmas season earlier in the evening. The plan is like a military operation. The 70-year-old Castellano was the reputed boss of the Gambino crime family, a decades-old mafia family in New York City. Gotti was a 45-year-old member of the Gambino family who didn't like boss Castellano's recent instructions not to trade in drugs. Castellano was worried the federal government was paying too much attention to their drug activities. Gotti ignored Castellano's and continued to have his people trade heroin. But because the federal government was watching, news of wiretaps showing Gotti and his associates were still dealing drugs became public. They figured their days were numbered, Blum said, so rather than wait around for Castellano to get to them, they planned a very daring hit on the mob boss. After killing Castellano, Gotti succeeded him as the leader of the Gambino family and went on to become one of the most notorious mob bosses in history. The federal government took Gotti to trial 3 times in the late 80s, failing each time to get a conviction. Gotti's seemingly inability to be charged earned him the nickname Teflon Don. In 1992, the government finally convicted Gotti on numerous charges, including Castellano's murder. One of the important witnesses in the 1992 conviction was
Sammy the Bull Gravano, a former member of the Gambino family, testified that he sat in the car with Gotti during Castellano's assassination and that they used walkie-talkies to notify the gunman when Castellano's limo was approaching. The New York Times reported at the time that Gotti maintained a fixed smile as he stared at his former friend and trusted aide during Gravano's testimony. That testimony helped Gotti earn a life in prison sentence, where he died in 2002. So there you go. There you go. Paul Castellano, Sparks Steakhouse. Let me know what you think.
So let me know what you think. John Gotti eventually died in prison. Cancer. He wasn't Teflon when it came to the feds. He beat other cases. It's almost impossible to beat the feds. We will talk soon. Subscribe to my channel. Like, hit the notification button. True crime and travel. JLR. At another crime scene. Right here. This is mob stuff. We'll talk soon. Stay tuned.